The drone came in low out of the eastern dark, running without lights the way the old supply birds used to when the plateau checkpoints were still active. I heard its rotors before I saw it, a specific wobble in the high-frequency range that told me one of its stabilizers had taken a knock somewhere along the route. I was standing on the tower's exterior catwalk at the time, doing nothing more purposeful than watching the cloud cover roll in from the Telvari Ridge. Retired people do that. We stand in the cold and watch things approach. It set down in the relay yard with a hard bounce, tipped onto one skid, and the engine cut itself off the way a machine does when it has decided it has done enough. I waited. No manifest light, no sender code on the transponder, just static. I took the lamp from the hook by the hatch and walked out to it. The cargo bay held one item, a signal drum, the old kind, roughly cylindrical, 60 centimeters across, sealed with a courier lock that had been reset to a 6-digit field code. Someone had drilled 4 small air holes through the top plate. They had done it recently. The metal curls around the holes were still bright. I stood there with the lamp, and I did not move for a long time. Then I opened it. She was curled inside with her knees pulled up and her arms wrapped around them. Violet-gray skin, the color of slate after rain. Gold lines traced along her forearms and up the sides of her neck. Faint, the kind of thing you'd miss in daylight, the kind of thing that would find you in the dark. Wide silver eyes that caught my lamp and gave back more light than they'd received, the way deep water does. She was small, smaller than the drum had suggested, because she had packed herself tightly to keep from rolling. She did not make a sound. She looked at me with an expression I did not have a word for yet, though I learned one later. I reached in slowly and she let me lift her out. That is the whole of the beginning, a drone with a wobbling stabilizer, a signal drum with drilled air holes, and a child who had been folded into it by someone who loved her enough to send her away. I carried her inside and set her on the workbench and boiled water for the field ration broth I keep for when the supply run is late. She watched every movement I made with those silver eyes. When I slid the mug toward her, she looked at it for a moment, then looked at me, then looked at the mug again. A small, careful sequence of looking that I came to understand as her version of a question. I nodded. She took it in both hands and drank. While she drank, I checked the perimeter board. The plateau's outer sensor ring still functioned, even if the relay tower itself had been decommissioned 8 months back. That was why I was still here, winding down the last of the secondary systems, a job that had stretched from a projected 6 weeks into something considerably longer. The way jobs do when a person is in no particular hurry to leave a place she has lived in for 19 years. The board showed a new flag on the eastern approach road. Not a traveler flag, not the intermittent blip of a single vehicle stopping and going. A settlement flag, the pattern the old military survey system used when it detected multiple sources holding a fixed position, grouped, waiting. I had 8 months of signal logs from the plateau's fringe traffic. I pulled them and found the signature. The continuance had been making its way along the Telvari Colonial Corridor for 11 weeks, working tower to tower. They moved systematically and they moved completely, which meant by the time anyone on the plateau knew they were coming, there was no longer a functioning relay network to carry that information. I had not known they were coming because my tower was dead and I had been paying attention to the wrong kind of news. I looked at the child on my workbench. She had finished the broth and set the mug down with a small click, deliberate and neat. She was tracing one finger along the edge of the console behind her, feeling the knobs and toggle guards with the focused attention of someone learning a room in the dark. The continuance's doctrine holds that the bioluminescent trait in Telvari-born children represents a contamination of the signal. Their theology is built around broadcast purity, the idea that the relay frequencies used by Telvari colonist communities are a sacred medium, and that a child whose body generates light in the gold line frequencies is a living heresy. I had read their position papers years ago, when the first culling reports came in from the outer rim. I had read them the way you read something you cannot quite make yourself believe is real. 18 hours, that was my estimate, based on the flag pattern and the standard continuance advance rate from the logs. They would reach the tower by mid-morning. I could not run. My transport had a cracked drive housing that I had not yet gotten around to repairing, because I had nowhere pressing to be. I could not fight. I am 63 years old and my left knee has been a management problem since a scaffold fall 7 years back. What I had was the tower. A dead tower on a stripped plateau with a below-ground equipment bunker that the decommissioning survey had logged as empty. I carried the child down the bunker ladder in 2 trips, her first, then the lamp and the emergency kit. She descended the last 4 rungs herself, feeling for each one with careful feet. At the bottom she stood in the beam of my lamp and looked around at the relay racks and the dormant junction boards and the old antenna array control console, which had not been powered in 8 months. I pulled out the camp stretcher and made it up for her. She stood beside it, touching the edge of the canvas. I patted the surface. She sat down. Lay down. Pulled her knees up the same way she had been in the drum. Old habit, that posture. Old habit of making herself small. I turned back to the antenna console and started thinking. The array was physically intact. The tower decommissioning had been a bureaucratic event, not a demolition. They had pulled the operating license, flagged the frequency allocations as retired, and stopped the maintenance contract. The hardware was still there. If I could restore power to the array and get the uplink board running, I had a transmitter. Not a licensed one, not a clean one, but a transmitter. The problem was the signal. The continuance monitored transmission traffic on the plateau's relay band. The moment I went on air, they would know exactly where I was. I sat with that problem for a while. The child had gone quiet behind me. When I turned to check, she was asleep, curled on the stretcher in that same tight posture, the gold lines on her arms doing their soft, slow pulse in the dark. Not a glow exactly, more like the way embers breathe under ash. I sat down on the floor beside the stretcher and I watched her breathe. Here is what I had been in my working years. 19 years at a plateau relay station means 19 years of learning the signal in a way that has nothing to do with the technical manuals. You learn it the way you learn weather, by feel, by pattern, by the quality of the silence between transmissions. You learn which frequencies carry which kinds of noise, which atmospheric conditions bend a signal into shapes the handbooks don't account for, which tricks the relay operators on the outer rim use to push a message through when the sanctioned channels are jammed or gone. The continuance used a command frequency for its advance operations, a specific narrow band, encrypted, cycling. I had it in my logs. I had been picking it up for 3 weeks without understanding what it was. A regular, ordered pulse, more structured than commercial traffic, too quiet for a survey operation. I knew that frequencies shaped the way I knew a voice. And the child, sleeping 4 feet away from me, generated a bioluminescent field in the gold line frequencies. Not sound, light. But the Telvari bioluminescent trait operates on a biological oscillation cycle that, when transduced through a relay array's electromagnetic pickup, produces a signal analog in a band that overlaps, imprecisely, partially, but genuinely, with the continuance's command frequency. I had not known that when I carried her down the ladder. I worked it out over the next 2 hours, sitting on the concrete floor, sketching the frequency map on the back of a decommissioning checklist with a grease pencil. I am not going to pretend there was no cost in what I worked out next. I understood what it would take before I started pulling the junction boards. I spent 4 hours restoring power to the array. The child woke partway through, watched me work without speaking, and at some point appeared beside my elbow and held the lamp steady while I reconnected the uplink board's power rail. I did not ask her to. She simply assessed the situation and determined that holding the lamp was useful. I did not say anything because there was nothing adequate to say, and because she would not have understood the words anyway, and because the lamp held steady was exactly what I needed. By the time the perimeter board surface sensor registered the continuance advance party crossing the plateau's midpoint marker, I had the array live. I could not broadcast my own transmission. The moment my voice or any recognizable signal pattern went out on that band, the continuance would triangulate and be at the bunker hatch in under 20 minutes. I did not need 20 minutes. I needed 6 hours, enough time for a signal to reach the Telvari community contact I had found in the fringe network logs, and for a response vehicle to make the crossing from the nearest settlement. What I needed to transmit was not a voice. It was a carrier. I sat the child down on the console chair, and I adjusted the array pickup to its maximum sensitivity. The pickup was designed to detect atmospheric interference. It was, in essence, a very precise listener. What I pointed it at was her. She understood something was happening. She sat very still, the way she had been still in the drum, and watched my hands. The gold lines along her forearms and neck were cycling at their usual slow rhythm. I configured the transduction matrix to convert her bioluminescent field's oscillation into an electromagnetic carrier signal. Then I routed that carrier into the continuance's command frequency and opened the array's full transmit power. The effect was immediate. Her light did not change. She did not feel anything. The array was receiving her field passively. She was not being touched or altered in any way. But out on the band, on the continuance's locked command frequency, her rhythm was suddenly present at a power level that swamped their operational traffic. Not noise, something more coherent than noise, a pattern that the continuance's receivers could not filter out because it was not interference, it was a signal, and it sat precisely in the middle of their channel. Their advanced communications went dark, not destroyed, drowned. The antenna array is not rated for sustained full power operation without active cooling. The cooling system requires the main tower power plant, which was decommissioned. I had bypassed the safety interlocks because there was nothing else to do. I knew what would happen when the hardware reached thermal limit. I kept the transmission open for 4 hours and 11 minutes. During that time, I sent the contact signal to the Telvari settlement on the reserve channel. A single short burst, field code only, the location flag and a retrieval request. Then I came back to the continuance's frequency and I sat on it. The child sat in the chair beside me. She had worked out, at some point in the second hour, that her arms needed to stay still, that any change in her rhythm would shift the carrier, and she held them across her lap without moving. She was 4 years old, I estimated, perhaps 5. She held her arms still for 4 hours because she had understood that it mattered. At the 4-hour mark, the array began throwing thermal alerts. At 4 hours and 6 minutes, the uplink board's primary driver failed. I rerouted to the secondary and kept going. At 4 hours and 11 minutes, the array's power conditioning unit failed completely, and the transmitter went off the air. The silence in the bunker was total. I sat in it. Then I became aware that it was not total, that the child was speaking, a sequence of subsonic hum clicks I could feel through the soles of my boots on the concrete. Even if I could no longer resolve the frequency into anything I could hear, the array was gone. But that was not the only reason I could not hear her. The sustained exposure to the array's electromagnetic field at close range, over 4 hours, at the power levels I had been running. I had known about that too when I started pulling the junction boards. The human auditory system has certain limits. I had spent my career learning to live within them. I had chosen, with complete awareness, to discard them. I could see her mouth moving. I could feel the vibration of her voice through the floor. I could not hear her. I put my hand on top of her hands, folded in her lap. She stopped clicking and looked up at me with those wide silver eyes. I do not know what my face showed. Something she could read, I think, because she turned her hands over under mine and held on. We stayed like that until the perimeter board, running on backup battery, registered a vehicle on the northern approach. A pattern I did not recognize from the continuance logs: civilian transport, single source, moving fast and without hesitation toward the tower. I climbed the ladder first and cracked the bunker hatch, morning light, pale and thin. The plateau wind, which I could no longer hear but could feel pressing cold against my face. A transport crawler coming across the flat ground from the north, kicking dust. I went back down and helped her up the ladder. She climbed it herself, rung by rung, the same careful feet as the first time. I came up behind her. The crawler stopped 20 meters out. 3 Telvari adults got out, tall, the same violet-gray coloring, the same gold lines, brighter in the morning light than hers, the lines of grown people with the trait fully expressed. One of them stopped when she saw the child. Not a dramatic stop, a stop like a word catching in the throat. The child looked at the 3 of them, looked back at me. I crouched down to her level. My left knee registered its usual complaint. I did not notice it much. She put her hand against the side of my face, very lightly. Her palm was warm. Then she turned and walked across the gravel toward the 3 Telvari, and the one who had stopped came forward and gathered her in, and the gold lines where their arms met were the same frequency, the same slow pulse, and it occurred to me that I was seeing something that had a word I did not know and did not need to know. The Telvari woman looked over the child's head at me. She said something. I could see her mouth form words. I spread my hands, a gesture I hoped was clear enough. She was still for a moment, and then she pressed her right hand briefly to her collarbone and inclined her head. I pressed my hand to my collarbone and inclined mine. The continuance patrol reached the relay yard 2 hours after the crawler left. I was sitting on the catwalk steps in the thin plateau sunshine, drinking cold tea, watching them come. They walked with the precision of an organization that has never been uncertain of its authority. 7 of them, in the pale gray coats their order wears, with the signal emblem on the shoulder. Their senior officer stood at the base of the catwalk steps and spoke to me at some length. I watched his mouth move. At a certain point he seemed to understand that I was not going to respond in kind, and his expression shifted into something that was not uncertainty exactly, but adjacent to it. He looked at the tower, the dead tower, the burned-out array housing visible at the top, the power conditioning unit that was going to need to be catalogued as a total loss. He looked back at me. I drank my tea. He said one more thing. I lip-read 2 words out of it: signal and empty. Then he turned and led his patrol back across the relay yard the way they had come. That is how it ended. No confrontation, no wreckage. Just an old woman with a dead tower and a cup of cold tea, and 7 men in gray coats who found nothing because there was nothing left to find. I filed the tower's decommissioning completion report that afternoon, citing equipment failure. The array was a total loss, which was true. I listed the cause as thermal cascade from an unsupervised power test, which was also true, in its way. I left the plateau the following week. My transport's cracked drive housing I repaired myself, which took most of a day, and cost me 3 skinned knuckles. I drove north. There is a particular quality to silence that I had not understood before. Not absence. I had spent 19 years in the quiet of a border plateau, which is its own kind of silence, full of wind and the creak of the tower in a gust, and the low-frequency hum of an active relay array. That silence had texture. The silence I have now is different. It is simply the space where sound used to be. I have learned to read it. Lips, mostly. Vibration. The way a room changes when someone enters. You adapt. That is what people do. I keep, on the windowsill of the room I now rent in a settlement town 200 kilometers north of the plateau, a piece of the array's burned uplink board. Not for sentiment exactly. More because it is the only part of the tower I thought to bring with me, and the question of why I took it rather than something else is one I find I do not need to resolve. Some things you hold on to without needing to name the reason. I called it hers because that is what it was. A life that belonged to her, that someone else had tried to define as something wrong and dangerous and in need of correction, and that turned out to be, when you let it rest in your hands for a while and paid attention, just a child, sitting in a signal drum with her knees pulled up, waiting to see what the world was going to do next. The world did what it could. So did I.